First off, I just want to thank both you, Dr. Beekler and Dr. Lilly, for a wonderful trip. And I had a really great time. And I think I learned a lot more about the culture and some of the ways that business is done in Vietnam than I ever thought I would. So, also knowing that Screencast only allows me to go for 15 minutes, I'm going to try and fit it under 15 minutes as best as I can. So, here's a quick reflection on my time in Vietnam and my total appreciation for the experiences I got to have. So first off, I want to give a little introduction to my experiences in studying abroad. This is the second time I've had the chance to go abroad, and I've always thought that it's quite an eye-opening experience for the chance to go abroad, but it's always in different ways than I expect. There are things that I anticipate seeing, and then there are things that I never thought I would see, and they always surprise me with what I like the most and what I see while I'm abroad, the differences in culture. It really always impresses me with what I feel like I've learned. And I always come away with a feeling of having a greater cultural experience that I'm much more of, I know it's an Elon expression, but much more of a global citizen. I feel like I know and understand a little bit more about the world that we live in. And it's a continual opportunity for me to appreciate the beauty of the world that we live in and the different people that we associate with. So every single time I've had the chance to go abroad, it's just there are areas of the world that are breathtakingly beautiful, and there's such a rich sense of culture that it's a shame to not get to the chance to experience it. So I want to go through and start to hit on kind of some of my completely different point of view at Vietnam. I feel that from the point of view that I expected to see, that it's such a difference that despite all of the stuff we did in the fall, and despite all the things that I envisioned the trip being, it was so much more and so different from being in the bustling cities of Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City, where you're in the proximity of 6.5 to 8 million people, to then moving over to the organic farms or moving into the Mekong Delta, where you're totally removed from society and in such a dynamically different place. That's one of the things that stuck out to me is Vietnam is a truly dynamic environment as a country. There's truly both sides of the spectrum. You have the mountainous, the agricultural areas, and then you have the melting pots of the metropolitan centers that are similar to any large city in the United States. Vietnam was unlike anything I've ever seen before, and rightfully so, had drastically different culture, drastically different religion, and drastically different economic policies, and even political policies. I'd never been to a communist country before. I'd never gotten to see a country where the predominant religion was not Christianity or Catholicism. It was truly interesting to see a country that's predominantly Buddhist. And then for me, it was really a treat to see an economy that was truly in the infancy. It was back in my mind something that I would have imagined seeing in the United States over 100 years ago. So I think that these three things particularly led to an overall positive impact for me. And I think that anyone that goes and has the chance to be abroad truly gets almost a forced experience of fostering open mindedness, being open to different ways of life, being open to seeing different cultures and genuinely different people all trying to do the same thing, trying to survive in this world. So, moving forward from this, how Vietnam changed me. I think that, like any study abroad I've done in the past, it gives me a much better appreciation for the life that I've lived. I have such a better understanding how lucky I am and how lucky all of us are to have little things like just being able to go to the water to the faucet in my bathroom and take a drink of tap water and know that it's safe, or to be able to order ice in my drink, or just the ability that I own a car is something that a lot of people in other countries don't have the chance to or don't have the means to fulfill. So it's overall been an appreciation for how lucky I am. I also feel like it gave me a sense of reality to Southeast Asia, something that I had never seen or been to before. It gave face to pictures I had seen. So it was totally a new view of a completely different world for me. And then overall, I feel like one of the cultural things I got to experience was an understanding or a greater understanding of the American War in Vietnam, the conflict between our countries, and how truly different it was than I expected it and from what I learned when I was in high school about the conflict itself. So I think that I had a lot of naive impressions about this area of the world that truly changed over the 3 weeks that we were there, and I got to meet a bunch of wonderful people. And Vo was a fantastic guide and a great friend, and I'm so happy that I've been able to stay in touch with him through Facebook. And there's just such a want in this country to learn from America and to just continue to progress that it was really impressive to me. And it was kind of something else I learned about myself, that through all the world travel I've done, it's only strengthened my love for the United States. There's something about being abroad, but there's nothing like coming home, stepping into American soil, and seeing the flag and just feeling this sense of belonging. And probably one of the biggest things I learned about myself abroad is just that I was a little more adventurous than I expected to be. There was a lot of foods that I tried that I thought I would never try in my life, and probably when I was a little kid I would have been terrified and not touched them, especially like when they brought a giant fish to our table in the Mekong Delta and just told us that they had caught it in the river and fried it. And it was actually a wonderful meal and probably one of the best that I had ever had in or probably the best I'd had in Vietnam. I also felt that I had a sense of self-sufficiency. There's something to being able to get your way around a country where you know none of the language and being able to converse and, I guess, make your way around enough that I could order a taxi, that I could order dinner, and that I could get myself around and be self-sufficient. So it kind of gives you a better sense of being a world traveler. And then about myself personally, it reaffirmed my fascination with history and economics. Being able to learn about the policies of Doi Moi while we were at the university in Hanoi, and then coupling that with history, I feel that the two are kind of inseparable. The history of the country is tied to its economic development as well. And I think that learning the two of them is something that I didn't expect to learn it to the degree that we did. And I'm really happy that we did, because it's so different learning about a country who's just starting with their economic policies, that's just starting to privatize business within the last 30 years, and to see how they've gone from day one to now, how much the economy has grown and how it's changed the country and the people within it. So I thought that that was one of the most fascinating parts of our entire trip. And then kind of some of the things that I noticed about the people of Vietnam is they're really hardworking. They're really adaptable. And it was something that I noticed when we were at the Jonathan Charles factory, that there's a ton of people that have these set skills, but they're really excited and ready to learn something else. They want to own the skill. They want to be able to be hardworking and to earn their pay so that they can survive. And then another thing that really impressed me is how welcoming the people are. I mean, to a bunch of Americans who were just involved in, our countries were involved in a major war 40 years ago, and they were welcoming, wanted to learn about our culture, and they didn't blame any of us. Something I want to touch on later is something that was a major takeaway for me. So, without further ado, I'm going to move into some of the major takeaways. So, my first major takeaway was the overwhelming pollution. I had known that pollution is a bigger problem in Southeast Asia, but it was something totally different to see in person, to see stuff floating down the river, just trash, or to see plants floating down the water that you can't see an inch deep in. And then on a clear day, like this picture on the left, being able to only see a couple miles of visibility because of the smog. It was really eye-opening, because when I think of pollution being a problem in the United States, it's nothing compared to what it is in Southeast Asia. So it made me really think that pollution is a problem. And it kind of got me questioning, how do you attempt to fix something like this? How do you attempt to fix the infrastructure problems? How do you attempt to fix the legal problems? How do you attempt to fix the controls on what industry can and can't do? It was something that Vietnam is just starting this process. They have a long way to go, but looking back at where the United States was 100 years ago and to where we are now, it's such a different take that it really was eye-opening for me to see what I anticipate will happen in Vietnam, something similar to what happened in the United States at the turn of the century. And being able to see a beautiful cathedral, like the picture on the right here, beautiful French architecture in the middle of Hanoi, and it's just covered with ash and covered with smog and covered with pollution that hasn't been cleaned in years and years and years. Something that I would never see in the United States, and something that I would never see abroad in Europe. It's just a truly different way of life. Anyone that tells me that pollution isn't a problem in the United States, I will now tell them, go to Southeast Asia and then tell me it's not problem, and I think you'll have a different answer. Moving forward to that, my second takeaway that I kind of touched on earlier is the attitude towards Americans. I was very impressed with how civilized and objective the Vietnamese treated us, and it was almost non-existent anti-Americanism, and there's such an encouragement of tourism and an encouragement to learn about our culture rather than an aversion to our culture, which is not true in a lot of countries, and that really impressed me. Was the people were willing to help us. They were willing to suffer through our butchering of their language to get to know us for who we are, and that's something that I don't always get when I go abroad, especially in Europe. There's a lot of anti-Americanism sometimes, and it was a breath of fresh air for me. So that was a really big takeaway for me. And then a third major takeaway is the pride and tradition that the Vietnamese have. There's a lot of specialized occupations that I saw when we were in Hoi An, and they're really proud of themselves. They're proud of the tradition of the tailor shops, of the silk shops, of everything that they have. And it was really noticeable with Hai when we were in the bus ride, and he was truly showing sadness for what was being taken away from the natural beauty of his country with the effects that modernization is having. And it got me to think, how do you balance the tradition of the country with the will to modernize and the younger generations willing to be like the West and the ever push of westernization? How is there a way to compromise in that middle ground of preserving traditional Vietnam and also progressing through technology and westernization? But overall, I feel like everyone had a pride for how far the country's come since the war, how much it's changed since 1986 when the open door policy began. I think it's an amazing thing that they've really almost accepted the war as its past and its present, and here we're going in the future. Here's where we can go, and here's what we need to do. That's been kind of one of the greatest things I've taken away, is how forward-looking the people of Vietnam have been. Kind of some of the lasting remarks. For me, it was very interesting being on the other side of something like the American and Vietnamese conflict that happened during the Cold War, being at times referred to as the enemy while we were there, and just learning about the war from almost like the entire world's view rather than the United States view, and how there was opposition not just in the United States, but there were protests all over the world about this country and the conflict that we had entered into. And it was really eye-opening seeing it from more than just one perspective. And overall, I think that this is kind of the sense I had throughout the trip, is the eye-opening experience of seeing things that I've learned about in the United States and things that I've experienced, but seeing them from a totally different perspective. Something like when I go to work and I think about what I want, I think about a job I want to be satisfied in, a job that makes me happy. Whereas you go to Vietnam and people are looking for any way to move to the city or any way to survive. And it's just totally different cultures, and it's kind of a wonderful thing to see how different our world is, even though we're all here doing the same thing. We're getting by, we're surviving. And that's the biggest thing I think I take away from this trip. The difference between our culture and the difference between their culture, and how it's changing. How Vietnam is becoming more Western, but how they're also retaining the traditions that they've had for hundreds of years. Overall, I think I've had this kind of experience abroad many times. It's kind of a melting of culture. Each individual place has its own unique culture, its own unique way of life that is ever changing, but is still steeped in history. And I just want to once again thank you for allowing us to have this wonderful trip, to have the ability to have major takeaways, to have the ability to analyze where we were and where we came from, and to see when we started what we expected the country to be like and what we expected the people to be like. And then at the end, to have been fortunate enough to build relationships with someone like Vo, to build relationships with Christoph, to build relationships with the people we saw and the things that we got to do. I think that overall it was a life-changing experience for a lot of us. I know for me, it definitely opened my eyes up to the rest of the world and how different it is. And that was one of the reasons I chose this trip. I thought it was time to experience what the other side of the globe had to offer. And I would say that that's my biggest reflection on this period. A chance to see how the other half lives, a chance to see what Vietnam is about. And I'm forever thankful for that. Thank you.